The blood on Willow Owens's hands was not her own, but in the eyes of Reverend Pritchard and his flock, it might as well have been the mark of Satan himself. Superior, Arizona had never been kind to outsiders, but in the summer of 1883, the copper mining town's suspicion had curdled into something far more dangerous. Willow had arrived 6 months earlier, a woman alone with nothing but a worn medical bag and knowledge that most folks deemed unnatural for her sex. She had set up a small practice in a leaning shack at the edge of town, treating miners with crushed fingers and their wives through difficult births, asking little in return beyond enough to keep beans on her table. The townspeople took her services grudgingly, paying her in coins they tossed on her table as though afraid to touch her hand directly. The trouble began on a Tuesday morning when Martha Hendricks came running down the dusty main street, her skirts billowing behind her, screaming that her boy Samuel had stopped breathing. Willow had been at the general store, and without hesitation, she ran toward the Hendricks home, her bag clutched against her chest. She found the 7-year-old boy blue around the lips, a piece of hard candy lodged deep in his throat. His mother was hysterical, his father frozen in helpless terror. Willow did not pause to explain. She had read about the procedure in her father's medical journals, had even practiced it on her younger brothers when they were learning. She positioned Samuel on his side, struck his back with measured force, and when that failed, she did something that would seal her fate in Superior. She opened the boy's mouth, reached her fingers in deep, and when she still could not dislodge the candy, she took out her smallest blade and made a careful incision in the soft tissue of his throat, creating a passage for air. The boy gasped, coughed, and began to wail. Within moments, his color returned, but Martha Hendricks did not thank her. Instead, she stumbled backward, staring at the blood on Willow's hands and the small knife she held, and screamed. By evening, half the town had gathered outside Reverend Pritchard's church. Willow stood on her porch, watching the torches gather like fireflies in the dusk, and knew that saving Samuel's life might cost her everything. The Reverend's voice carried on the hot wind, speaking of witchcraft and devilry, of unnatural acts performed by unwomanly hands. Someone threw a rock that shattered her window. Someone else shouted that she should be driven out before she brought a curse upon them all. Willow stood her ground, though her hands trembled. She had faced hostility before, in every town she had passed through since her father's death. A woman with medical knowledge was either a witch or a whore in the eyes of most frontier folk, and sometimes both. She had learned to endure their glares and whispers, but this felt different. This felt like it might end with a rope. "That is enough!" The voice cut through the growing mob like a blade through cloth, deep and commanding. Willow looked toward the sound and saw a man on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered in the dying light. He rode forward slowly, his horse's hooves raising small clouds of dust. "You all should be ashamed." "This is not your concern, Bennett Fuller," Reverend Pritchard called out, his face red and sweating in the torchlight. "This woman performed unnatural acts on an innocent child." "I heard she saved Samuel Hendricks's life," Bennett replied, dismounting with an easy grace. He was younger than Willow had initially thought, perhaps 30 at most, with sun-darkened skin and eyes that seemed to catch and hold the last rays of daylight. "I heard that boy would be dead if not for her." "She cut him," Martha Hendricks shrieked. "Cut his throat like a hog for slaughter." Bennett turned to look at Willow for the first time, his gaze direct and searching. "Is the boy alive?" Willow's voice came out steadier than she felt. "He is alive. He is breathing. He will bear a small scar, but he will grow to be a man." "Then seems to me she is a miracle worker, not a witch," Bennett said, turning back to the crowd. "You folks want to punish someone for saving a child? Want to explain that to Samuel when he asks why the woman who saved his life had to leave town? Want to explain it to God when your time comes?" The crowd shifted uneasily. Bennett Fuller was not a man easily dismissed. He owned one of the more profitable claims in the copper mines, employed a dozen men, and unlike many of the mine owners, he worked alongside his crew. He was respected, and his words carried weight. The methods were unholy, Reverend Pritchard insisted, but his voice had lost some of its fervor. The methods were medical, Willow said, finding her courage. My father was a surgeon in Philadelphia. He taught me everything he knew before he died. What I did today is called a cricothyrotomy. It has been performed by doctors for years. If you want to call knowledge evil, then go ahead, but do not pretend it is anything other than fear speaking. The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Then Bennett Fuller did something unexpected. He laughed, a warm sound that seemed to ease the tension in the air. Well, Reverend, you heard the lady. You going to argue with Philadelphia medicine? My mother always said those Eastern doctors were the finest in the world. Several people in the crowd chuckled nervously. The moment of violence had passed, though Willow could still feel hostility radiating from many of the faces turned toward her. Bennett stayed on her porch as the crowd slowly dispersed, the torches moving away like a constellation breaking apart. When they were alone, he turned to her. You all right, miss? Mrs. Owens, she corrected automatically, then shook her head. Miss Owens, I am a widow. And yes, I am all right. Thank you for intervening. Bennett Fuller. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused from hard work. You probably should not stay here tonight. Folks might get brave again once the whiskey takes hold. I have nowhere else to go. You can stay at my place, he said, then caught himself. I have a bunkhouse for my workers. You can have my room at the main house. It is not much, but it has a lock on the door and walls thick enough to stop a bullet. Willow wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain her dignity and independence, but she was not foolish enough to reject practical help when it was offered. She nodded slowly. I would be grateful. Let me gather some things. She packed quickly, taking her medical bag, a few changes of clothing, and the small daguerreotype of her father that was her most precious possession. Bennett waited patiently, then helped her onto his horse. The animal was a beautiful bay mare, well cared for and gentle. Willow had ridden before, though it had been years, and she settled into the saddle behind Bennett with only slight awkwardness. His property was about 3 miles from town, nestled in a small valley where a creek provided precious water. The house was indeed modest, a sturdy structure of wood and adobe with a covered porch. The bunkhouse was nearby, and she could hear men's voices drifting from within, talking and laughing. The sound was oddly comforting after the hostility of the town. Come on inside, Wanjong, Bennett said, dismounting and helping her down. I will get some supper going. You must be hungry. She was, though she had not realized it until he mentioned food. The day's events had driven all thoughts of basic needs from her mind. She followed him into the house, noting the clean floors and tidy arrangement of furniture. For a bachelor, he kept a remarkably neat home. You do not have to cook for me, she protested as he moved toward the kitchen area. I am cooking for myself anyway. Might as well make extra. He glanced at her over his shoulder. Unless you're too proud to eat with a copper miner. I am not proud at all, she said quietly. I am grateful. I just do not understand why you helped me. Bennett was silent for a moment, pulling out a skillet and some provisions from a small pantry. My sister died when I was 15. She was 12, got kicked by a horse, and the bleeding would not stop. The town doctor was drunk, as usual, and he did nothing but tell my parents to pray. She bled to death on our kitchen table. He struck a match to light the stove. If someone like you had been there, someone with actual skill and knowledge, she might have lived. So when I see folks trying to punish someone for saving a life, it makes me angry. The raw pain in his voice made Willow's throat tighten. I am sorry about your sister. Her name was Clara. She would have been 27 this year. He cracked eggs into the skillet with practiced efficiency. She wanted to be a teacher, used to read everything she could get her hands on. They ate in comfortable silence, and afterward Bennett showed her to his room. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out toward the mountains. He gathered some of his things, assuring her he would be comfortable in the bunkhouse, and left her alone. Willow sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to shake, The terror she had held at bay all evening crashed over her, and she wrapped her arms around herself, breathing deeply until the trembling subsided. She had saved a child's life. She had done nothing wrong. Yet she had nearly been driven out of town, possibly killed, for the crime of being competent. Sleep came slowly, and her dreams were troubled. The next morning she woke to the sound of men heading out to the mines, their voices carrying in the early dawn. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Bennett at the stove again, frying bacon and brewing strong coffee. "Morning," he said, looking up with a slight smile. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected." She accepted the cup of coffee he offered, wrapping her hands around its warmth despite the already rising heat of the day. "I should go back to town. I cannot hide here forever." "You are not hiding. You are being sensible." He plated the bacon and some biscuits, setting them on the small table. "Give folks a day or two to calm down. Let them remember that Samuel is alive and well. They will come around." "You have more faith in people than I do." "Maybe. Or maybe I just know these folks better. They are scared, most of them. Life out here is hard, and they do not understand things that seem like magic. But they are not evil, just ignorant." Willow sipped her coffee, considering his words. "You are different from them. I have been to places they have not, seen things they have not seen." He sat across from her. "My father sent me to school in California for a few years before he died, and left me the mine. I learned that the world is bigger and stranger than what we see in these small towns, learned that women can be just as capable as men, sometimes more so. That is a radical notion for a mining town in Arizona. Maybe." He smiled again, and she found herself noticing details about him she had missed in the chaos of the previous evening. He had a strong jaw, slightly crooked nose that suggested it had been broken at some point, and eyes that were a surprising shade of green. There was a scar along his left temple, pale against his tanned skin. But it is the truth, so I do not see the point in pretending otherwise. She stayed at his property for 3 days. During that time, Bennett went into town each morning and returned with reports. Samuel was recovering well, already running around and boasting to other children about his scar. The general sentiment was shifting, with more people admitting privately that perhaps Willow had done the right thing. Reverend Pritchard was still preaching against her, but his congregation seemed less inclined to listen. During those 3 days, Willow found herself drawn into long conversations with Bennett. He was surprisingly well-read for a mining man, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. He asked her about her life, and she found herself telling him things she had shared with no one else, about her father, who had defied convention to teach his daughter medicine, about her brief marriage to a man who had died of cholera less than a year after their wedding, about her wandering years, moving from town to town, trying to find a place where she might be allowed to practice her skills. "Why Superior?" Bennett asked on the third evening as they sat on his porch, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. "It was as good as anywhere else. I heard they needed medical help, and I thought perhaps a mining town would be practical enough to accept a woman doctor." She laughed bitterly. "I was wrong." "You were not wrong. They just need time." He looked at her seriously. "Will you stay, even after this?" "I do not know. Where else would I go?" "You could stay here," he said, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "I mean, you could continue your practice. I would help you. My workers would come to you and their families. That alone would be enough to keep you busy and fed. And once folks see that you are under my protection, they will be less likely to cause trouble." "I do not need protection," she said automatically, but even as she spoke, she knew it was not entirely true. She did need help, whether she wanted to admit it or not. "Everyone needs help sometimes," Bennett said gently. "It is not weakness to accept it." She looked at him for a long moment. This unexpected man who had appeared in her moment of greatest need. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." "Because it is the right thing to do, and because—" He trailed off, then met her eyes. "Because in 3 days I have enjoyed your company more than I have enjoyed anyone's in years. Because you are brilliant and brave, And this town will be better for having you in it, because I think Clara would have liked you." The sincerity in his voice made her chest ache. She was not accustomed to such kindness, especially not from men. Most men either wanted something from her or wanted her gone. Bennett seemed to want neither, and that made him more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart than any amount of hostility could have been. "All right," she said finally, "I will stay, but I will pay you back for your help. I will tend to your workers and your animals. I will earn my place." "Fair enough." He extended his hand, and she shook it, sealing the agreement. The next morning, Bennett drove her into town in his wagon. She held her head high as they passed through the streets, though she could feel eyes on her from every window and doorway. They stopped at her small shack, and she was relieved to find that while her window was still broken, nothing had been stolen. She gathered the rest of her belongings while Bennett waited outside, a quiet presence that made her feel safer than any locked door could have. As they were loading the last of her things into the wagon, Martha Hendricks appeared. The woman looked haggard, her face drawn and her eyes red. She stopped a few feet away, twisting her hands in her apron. "Miss Owens," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Willow straightened, preparing for another confrontation. "I wanted to say thank you." The words came out in a rush. "Samuel is alive because of you. He is laughing and playing, and he tells everyone about how brave you were. I was scared. I did not understand what you were doing, and I thought terrible things, but you saved my boy's life, and I am sorry for how I acted." The apology was so unexpected that Willow could not speak for a moment. Finally, she managed, "How is Samuel's throat healing?" "Good, real good. There is a scar, but it is small. He is proud of it." Martha's eyes filled with tears. "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I nearly got you killed for saving my child. You were frightened. I understand." Willow did understand, even if the memory of that mob still made her hands shake. "If you are still willing to see patients, my sister has a baby coming soon. She is scared because her first labor was difficult. Would you help her?" "Of course I would help her." Willow felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Have her come see me. I am staying at the Fuller property for now." Word of Martha's apology spread quickly, and over the following weeks, more people began to seek out Willow's services. She set up a proper examination room in one of Bennett's outbuildings, cleaning it thoroughly and arranging her limited supplies. Bennett bought her a proper examining table from a medical supply company in Tucson, along with fresh bandages and medicines. She protested the expense, but he waved off her concerns. "Consider it an investment. Healthy workers are more productive workers," he said with a grin. She knew it was more than that, but she accepted the gifts because refusing would have been foolish, and because increasingly she found herself wanting to accept anything Bennett offered, not out of need, but out of the simple pleasure of being cared for. They fell into a rhythm over the following months. Willow tended to the miners and their families, treating everything from infected wounds to childhood illnesses. She helped deliver Martha's niece in a long but successful labor, earning the gratitude of another family. She set broken bones, extracted rotten teeth, and slowly built a reputation as someone who could be trusted with the health of the community. Bennett, for his part, seemed content to have her there. He included her in his evening meals, and they spent their nights talking about everything and nothing. He taught her to play poker, and she taught him some basic medical knowledge that might help in emergencies. He introduced her to his workers as though she were an honored colleague rather than a charity case, and they treated her with respect because he did. But there was more than respect growing between them, and both of them knew it. It was in the way their hands would brush when passing dishes at dinner, the way his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she was not looking, the way her heart would lift whenever she heard his horse approaching. They were both careful, both cautious, neither willing to speak of the feelings that were becoming impossible to ignore. The turning point came in late October when one of Bennett's miners, a young man named Thomas, was caught in a collapse. They brought him out unconscious, his leg crushed beneath falling rock. Willow worked for hours to save the limb, cleaning the wound and setting the shattered bone with Bennett assisting her, holding the man steady and following her instructions without question. When it was done and Thomas was sleeping, dosed with laudanum for the pain, Bennett walked Willow back to the house. His hands were stained with blood, his shirt ruined, but he seemed unconcerned about any of it. "You were amazing," he said as they reached the porch. "The way you knew exactly what to do, the way you stayed calm. Thomas would have lost that leg if not for you, might have died." "You helped," she said, suddenly exhausted. "I could not have done it alone. We make a good team." The words were simple, but the way he said them made her look up at him. His eyes were intense in the moonlight, searching her face. "Willow, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "I know this might not be appropriate. I know you have only been here a few months, but I cannot keep pretending that I do not feel what I feel." He took a step closer. "I have fallen in love with you. Somewhere between that first night when you stood up to that mob with your chin raised and tonight watching you save a man's life, I fell completely in love with you." She could not breathe. No one had spoken to her like this, not even her late husband, who had married her more out of convenience than passion. "Bennett, You do not have to say anything if you are not ready. I just needed you to know. Needed you to understand that you are not just someone I am helping out of charity. You are the woman I want to build a life with, if you will have me." The words she had been holding back for months came tumbling out. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, trying to convince myself it was just gratitude, but it is not. It is love. You make me feel safe and valued and seen in a way I have never felt before." He reached up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite his calloused hands. "Can I kiss you?" "Yes," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, soft and warm and perfect. She melted into him, her hands clutching his shoulders, and for the first time in her adult life, she felt like she had come home. They stood on that porch kissing until the moon had moved halfway across the sky. And when they finally pulled apart, Bennett was smiling in a way that made her knees weak. "Marry me," he said. "I know it is fast, but I'm 30 years old, and I know my own mind. I want you as my wife, as my partner. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to support your work and watch you save lives and be proud that you chose me." "Yes." She did not hesitate. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in early November by a justice of the peace, with Bennett's mine workers serving as witnesses. Reverend Pritchard refused to perform the ceremony, still convinced that Willow was somehow ungodly, but neither of them cared. What mattered was the promises they made to each other, standing in the simple courthouse in Superior with their hands clasped together. That night, in the bedroom that was now truly theirs, Bennett made love to her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, murmuring words of love and devotion until she was trembling beneath him. When they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, two souls finding completion in each other. Afterward, lying in his arms, with her head on his chest, Willow felt a peace she had never known. "I never thought I would have this," she said softly. "A home, a husband who respects what I do. Love. You deserve all of it and more." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You are extraordinary, Willow Fuller. This town is lucky to have you, and I am the luckiest man alive that you chose me." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Some members of the community still viewed Willow with suspicion, particularly when she successfully treated ailments that others had deemed hopeless. When she saved a woman from dying of childbed fever using careful sanitation techniques, rumors of witchcraft started circulating again. But Bennett stood by her always, defending her skill and knowledge to anyone who would listen. Slowly, steadily, opinions shifted. When the town doctor, old Dr. Graves, finally admitted that he could not keep up with the demands of his practice and began referring patients to Willow, it marked a turning point. Even Reverend Pritchard grudgingly acknowledged her skills after she successfully treated his wife's persistent cough. Samuel Hendricks, now 8 years old, appointed himself Willow's unofficial assistant, hanging around her examining room and asking endless questions about medicine. She found his curiosity charming and began teaching him basic anatomy and the importance of hygiene. His mother no longer objected, and Willow allowed herself to hope that perhaps Samuel might grow up to be a real doctor with proper training and credentials. In the spring of 1885, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had seen so many women die in childbirth, knew all the things that could go wrong. But Bennett was ecstatic, treating her as though she were made of spun glass, constantly worrying about her health. "I am a doctor," she reminded him with exasperated affection when he tried to stop her from seeing patients in her 4th month. "I know what I can and cannot do." "You are my wife, and I love you," he countered. "Let me worry about you. It is my job." She worked as long as she could, finally reducing her hours in her 8th month when climbing up into wagons became too difficult. Bennett was attentive and devoted, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings and reading to her from his collection of books. He transformed one of the spare rooms into a nursery, building a cradle with his own hands and painting it a cheerful yellow. Their son was born on a hot August night in 1885, after a labor that was mercifully short. Willow had Martha Hendricks with her as a midwife, the woman having learned much from watching Willow over the past 2 years. Bennett paced outside, refusing to leave, despite her insistence that he could wait in the house. When she finally held her son in her arms, his tiny face red and squalling, Willow wept with relief and joy. Bennett came in moments later, and his expression when he saw his child was something she would treasure forever, pure wonder and love. "He is perfect," Bennett breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "What should we name him?" "Benjamin," Willow said, "after your father, Benjamin Fuller." "Benjamin," Bennett repeated, his voice rough with emotion. "Hello, Benjamin. I am your father, and I promise to love you and protect you and teach you to be a good man." Motherhood was harder than Willow had anticipated. She had delivered dozens of babies, but caring for her own was entirely different. Benjamin was colicky and fussy, crying for hours despite her best efforts. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, struggling to balance caring for an infant with continuing her practice. Bennett stepped in without being asked, taking over Benjamin's care whenever he could. He learned to change diapers and warm bottles, walking the floor with their son in the middle of the night so Willow could sleep. His workers teased him good-naturedly about being henpecked, but he just laughed and told them they were jealous. "Not many men would help with the baby like you do," Willow said one evening as she watched him rock Benjamin to sleep. "Not many men are married to brilliant doctor," he replied. "Your work is important. Our son needs his mother healthy and rested, not exhausted and resentful. We are partners, remember? That means we share everything, even the hard parts." As Benjamin grew from infant to toddler, he proved to be a curious and energetic child. He followed his father around the property when Bennett was home, imitating his walk and his mannerisms. He sat in Willow's examining room playing quietly while she saw patients, already comfortable around medical matters in a way most children were not. Samuel Hendricks, now 11 years old, remained fascinated by medicine and spent much of his free time learning from Willow. She began to seriously consider sponsoring his education, perhaps sending him to medical school back east when he was older. Bennett supported the idea enthusiastically, always encouraging her ambitions and her desire to create opportunities for others. In the winter of 1887, when Benjamin was 2 years old, an influenza outbreak swept through Superior. Willow worked herself to exhaustion, going from house to house, treating the sick and trying to prevent the disease from spreading. Bennett helped however he could, delivering medicines and supplies, checking on families that Willow was worried about. They lost 3 people during that outbreak, including old Dr. Graves. Willow mourned each loss, but took some comfort in the dozens of lives she had saved. In the aftermath, the town council officially recognized her as Superior's primary physician, a title that came with a small salary from town funds and access to the old doctor's office and supplies. It was a victory, though a bittersweet one. Willow moved her practice into the proper medical office, leaving Bennett's property for the first time since their marriage. But she came home every evening to her husband and son, and that made everything worthwhile. "I am proud of you," Bennett told her the night after her first day in the new office. "You have earned every bit of this respect. You have saved countless lives. You have changed minds. You have proven that women can be just as capable as physicians as men." "I could not have done any of it without you," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "You believed in me when no one else did. You protected me and supported me and loved me. You are the reason I am here." "We are the reason we are here," he corrected gently. "We built this together." The years passed in a blur of work and love and family. Benjamin grew into a bright, thoughtful child who showed signs of inheriting both his mother's intelligence and his father's compassion. Samuel Hendricks went off to medical school in Philadelphia in 1890, funded partly by Willow and Bennett and partly by a scholarship he earned through his exceptional aptitude. He wrote regularly, telling them about his studies and thanking them for changing his life. In 1889, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Clara, after Bennett's sister. The pregnancy was unplanned but welcomed, and Clara proved to be an easier baby than Benjamin had been. She was sweet-tempered and calm, with her father's green eyes and her mother's determination. Bennett continued to run his mine successfully, and his profits allowed them to expand their house and improve Willow's medical practice. She hired an assistant, a young woman named Ellen, who wanted to learn medicine but whose family could not afford formal schooling. Together, they provided comprehensive medical care to Superior and the surrounding communities. The town that had once tried to drive Willow out now celebrated her. She was invited to social events, consulted on matters of public health, and treated with the respect she had always deserved. Young women began to see her as a role model, proof that they could pursue unconventional paths if they had the courage and determination. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1895, Bennett took Willow on a trip to San Francisco. They left the children with Martha Hendricks, who had become a close friend over the years, and spent a week exploring the city. They ate at fine restaurants, attended the theater, and spent long hours simply being together without the constant demands of work and family. On their last night in the city, as they stood on their hotel balcony watching fog roll in from the bay, Bennett pulled her close. "Have I told you lately that you are the most amazing woman I have ever known?" "Not in the last few hours," she teased, leaning into his embrace. "Then I am remiss. You are amazing. You are beautiful and brilliant and compassionate. You are a wonderful mother and an extraordinary physician. You are my best friend and the love of my life." He turned her to face him. "These 10 years with you have been the happiest of my life. I cannot wait to see what the next 10 bring." "I love you," she said simply, because sometimes the simplest words were the truest. "I love you more than I ever thought possible." They made love that night with a passion undiminished by a decade of marriage, and Willow felt grateful beyond measure for the path that had led her to this man. She thought about that terrible day when she had saved Samuel's life and been called evil for it. She thought about Bennett riding up to defend her when she had no one else. She thought about how easily she could have left Superior and never met him. When they returned home, Benjamin and Clara ran to greet them, and the house felt complete again. Willow went back to her practice, Bennett to his mine, and life continued in its beautiful, ordinary rhythm. In 1896, Samuel Hendricks returned to Superior as a fully qualified physician. He was 20 years old, confident and skilled, and he asked if he could join Willow's practice as her partner. She agreed immediately, proud beyond words of the young man who had once been a choking child on her examination table. "You saved my life," Samuel told her on his first day working alongside her. "And then you gave me a purpose. I will spend the rest of my career trying to live up to your example." "Just do good work and care about your patients," Willow said. "That is all anyone can ask." With Samuel there to share the workload, Willow finally had time to pursue some of her other interests. She started writing about her medical experiences, contributing articles to journals back east about frontier medicine and the unique challenges of treating patients in remote areas. Her writing was well received, and she began to correspond with other physicians, sharing knowledge and learning new techniques. Bennett encouraged every endeavor, reading her articles with pride and discussing them with anyone who would listen. "That is my wife," he would say, showing off her published work. "Brilliant, is she not?" Benjamin, at 11 years old, announced that he wanted to be a miner like his father. Willow was slightly disappointed, having hoped he might follow her into medicine, but Bennett was thrilled. "It is honest work," he told her when she expressed her concerns, "and it is his choice. We raised him to think for himself." Clara, on the other hand, showed a keen interest in medicine. At 6 years old, she was already following Willow around the office, asking questions and learning the names of instruments. Willow began teaching her basic anatomy. Delighted to have a daughter who might carry on her legacy, the turn of the century in 1900 felt significant. Willow was 39 years old, Bennett 47. They had been married for 15 years, had raised 2 wonderful children, and had built a life that exceeded anything either of them had imagined back in 1883. On New Year's Day, they had a celebration at their home, inviting friends and colleagues to mark the new century. Samuel came with his new wife, a teacher he had met during his time in Philadelphia. Martha Hendricks came with her husband and children. Ellen, Willow's assistant, brought her fiancé. The house was full of laughter and warmth. As midnight approached, Bennett pulled Willow out onto the porch, away from the noise and celebration. The Arizona night was cold but clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. 17 years ago, I saw a brave woman standing up to a mob, Bennett said, holding both her hands in his. I saw someone who refused to apologize for being extraordinary. I saw my future, though I did not know it yet. I saw someone who chose to do the right thing when it would have been easier to walk away, Willow replied. I saw kindness and strength and everything I'd been looking for without knowing I was searching. Here is to the next century, Bennett said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. May it be even better than this one. They kissed as the sounds of celebration rose from inside, ringing in the new year, surrounded by friends and family. Willow thought about everything they had survived and built together. She thought about the scared woman she had been, running away from town after town, never finding a place to belong. She thought about the man who had changed everything simply by believing in her. The years continued to be kind to them. Bennett's mind remained profitable, allowing him to eventually step back from daily operations and spend more time with his family. Benjamin followed through on his desire to work in mining, learning the business from his father and eventually taking over management of the Fuller claim. He was a fair and respected employer, treating his workers with the same dignity his father always had. Clara went off to medical school in 1908, sponsored by both her mother and Samuel Hendricks. She was one of only a handful of women in her class facing discrimination and skepticism, but she persevered just as her mother had taught her. When she returned to Superior as a licensed physician in 1912, it marked a moment of tremendous pride for Willow. 3 generations now connected by that day, she had saved Samuel's life, Samuel himself, now a respected physician. Clara, her daughter, following in her footsteps, and young Samuel's children, who grew up seeing women doctors as perfectly normal. Willow and Clara opened a small hospital in Superior in 1913, the first in the region. It was a modest facility, only 10 beds, but it allowed them to provide better care and perform more complex procedures. Bennett donated much of the money for the building, and the community rallied to support it as well. On Willow's 50th birthday in 1911, the town threw her a celebration. Nearly everyone in Superior attended, including people who had once called her a witch. Martha Hendricks gave a speech about how Willow had saved her son's life and changed the trajectory of an entire community. Samuel Hendricks spoke about his mentor and friend. Bennett said simply that she was the finest person he had ever known. Willow stood before the crowd, looking at the faces of people she had treated and taught and lived among for nearly 3 decades. I came to Superior thinking I would stay for a few months at most, she said. I had no idea I would find a home here. I had no idea I would find love and family and purpose. You all gave me those things, even those of you who were suspicious of me at first. You let me prove myself. You let me serve you. And you gave me the greatest gift of all. You gave me the chance to make a difference. Bennett wrapped his arm around her waist as she spoke, and she leaned into him, drawing strength from his presence as she had for 28 years. They grew old together, gracefully and gratefully. Bennett's hair turned silver and Willow's followed suit. They both slowed down, no longer able to work the long hours they once had, but they remained active in their community and their professions. They became grandparents when Benjamin married and had children of his own, and the joy of holding a grandchild was something neither of them had anticipated. In the spring of 1920, they sat on their porch much as they had countless times before. They were 69 and 77, still holding hands, still finding new things to talk about. The house behind them was quiet with the children grown and gone, but it did not feel empty. It felt peaceful. "Do you ever regret it?" Willow asked. "Marrying me? Taking on all the controversy and struggle that came with it?" Bennett looked at her as though she had asked the most absurd question imaginable. "Not for a single second. Marrying you was the smartest thing I ever did. Every day with you has been a gift." "Even the hard days?" "Especially the hard days. That is when I got to see how strong you are, how brave and resilient and absolutely extraordinary." He raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles as he had done thousands of times before. "I would do it all again without hesitation. I would choose you every single time." They sat together as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Two people who had found each other in the midst of chaos and fear, who had built something beautiful together, who had proven that love and respect could overcome any obstacle. Clara came by that evening to check on them, bringing her children with her. Samuel stopped in as well, an elderly man now, but still sharp and engaged. They shared a meal together, 4 generations bound by medicine and love, and that single moment years ago when Willow had refused to let a child die. As they ate, Samuel's grandson, a young boy of 8 named after Benjamin, asked his great-uncle Samuel about his scar. Samuel touched the faint mark on his throat and smiled. "Your great-grandmother gave me this scar when she saved my life. Some people called her evil for it, but a wise man called her a miracle worker. He was right." The boy looked at Willow with wide eyes. "Are you a miracle worker?" Willow laughed softly. "No, sweetheart. I am just a doctor who refused to give up. The real miracle was your great-grandfather believing in me when no one else would." Bennett caught her eye across the table and smiled. That same warm smile that had captured her heart 37 years earlier. No words were needed. They both knew how lucky they had been to find each other, how precious their time together had been. When everyone had gone home and they were alone again, Bennett and Willow walked slowly to their bedroom. They had shared this room for decades, had made love and argued and reconciled and dreamed within these walls. It was a room full of memories and love. They lay down together, Bennett's arm around Willow's shoulders, her head resting on his chest as it had on their wedding night. His heartbeat was steady and strong beneath her ear, a rhythm as familiar as her own breathing. "I love you," she murmured, half asleep. "I love you," he replied, his voice a rumble she felt more than heard. "Always have, always will." They fell asleep like that, 2 souls intertwined, 2 hearts beating as one. The story that had begun with accusations and fear had transformed into a tale of love and perseverance, proof that sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the most beautiful destinations. In the morning, they woke together as they had for thousands of mornings before, ready to face whatever the day might bring, secure in the knowledge that they faced it together. The woman who had once been called evil for saving a child's life had become a beloved pillar of her community. The cowboy who had called her a miracle worker had become her partner in every sense of the word. Their love story was not one of grand gestures or dramatic declarations, though it had certainly begun with drama. It was a story of daily choices choosing each other, choosing to believe in each other, choosing to build a life based on mutual respect and unwavering support. It was a story of two people who saw the best in each other and worked every day to deserve that faith. As Willow and Bennett moved through their final years, they watched their legacy unfold. Clara's hospital expanded, providing care to an ever-growing population. Samuel trained a new generation of physicians, passing on the lessons Willow had taught him. Benjamin's management of the mine created jobs and stability for dozens of families. Their grandchildren grew up in a world that was slowly becoming more accepting of women in medicine, partly because of the groundwork Willow had laid. They celebrated their golden wedding anniversary in 1935, surrounded by more people than could fit in their home. 50 years of marriage, 50 years of love, 50 years of partnership. Bennett was 92, but still sharp, still making jokes and telling stories. Willow was 84, her hands shaking slightly with age, but her mind clear. 50 years ago, I married the most stubborn woman in Arizona, Bennett announced to the crowd, his voice still strong. She has driven me crazy, challenged me, amazed me, and loved me every single day. I am the luckiest man who ever lived. Willow stood beside him, tears streaming down her face. 50 years ago, a man I barely knew defended me when I had no one else. He offered me shelter and support and eventually his heart. He has been my rock, my champion, my best friend, and my love. Every good thing in my life came from that moment he chose to stand up for what was right. They cut the cake together, their aged hands covering the knife handle, and Willow thought back to that terrified woman she had been in 1883. She thought about the mob, the fear, the certainty that her life was over. She thought about Bennett riding up like something out of a storybook, refusing to let injustice prevail. She thought about how close she had come to never knowing this love, this life, these people. How easily she could have left Superior before meeting him, or been driven out before he could intervene. The randomness of it all, the beautiful chaos that had brought them together filled her with gratitude so profound, it was almost painful. That night, lying in bed with Bennett's arms around her, Willow whispered into the darkness, "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," he murmured back. "I just gave you a safe place to land." "We saved each other," she decided, and he hummed in agreement. Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1937 at the age of 94. Willow held his hand as he slipped away, feeling his heart beat slow and then stop beneath her fingers. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. They had been together for 54 years, more than half her life, and the world felt impossibly empty without him. But even in her grief, she found comfort in their legacy. They had built something beautiful together, a family, a community, a love story that had inspired everyone who witnessed it. She had her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She had patients who still came to her seeking help. She had a life full of meaning and purpose. Willow lived for 3 more years, continuing to work in a limited capacity, offering advice to younger physicians and telling stories about the old days. She spoke often of Bennett, keeping his memory alive through her words. She told anyone who would listen about the cowboy who had defended her, believed in her, loved her without reservation. On a warm evening in May 1940, Willow passed away in her sleep at the age of 89. Her children found her in the morning, a peaceful expression on her face, as though she had been dreaming of something beautiful. On her nightstand was the daguerreotype of her father and a photograph of Bennett taken on their wedding day, his smile captured forever in silver and light. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Clara gave the eulogy, speaking of her mother's courage, skill, and unwavering dedication to helping others. Samuel spoke of the day Willow saved his life and how it had set him on a path that defined his entire existence. Benjamin talked about watching his parents' love story unfold. how it had taught him what marriage should be. They buried Willow beside Bennett in the small cemetery overlooking Superior, their graves side by side as they had been in life. The headstone read simply, Willow Owens Fuller, 1851-1940, physician, wife, mother. She saved lives and changed hearts. Next to it, Bennett's stone read, Bennett Fuller, 1843-1937, husband, father, friend. He saw miracles where others saw fear. In the years that followed, their story became legend in Superior. People told it to their children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of the woman who had been called evil for saving a child and the man who had recognized her true worth. The hospital that bore Willow's name continued to serve the community, and a scholarship fund established in Bennett's honor helped send dozens of young people to medical school. Samuel Hendricks lived to be 93, practicing medicine until he was well into his 80s. He always kept a photograph of Willow in his office and told every medical student he mentored about the woman who had saved his life and taught him his profession. He passed away in 1969, having trained 3 generations of physicians and saved countless lives of his own. Clara Fuller became one of the most respected physicians in Arizona, serving on boards and committees that shaped medical policy throughout the state. She married a fellow doctor and had 4 children, all of whom went on to contribute to their communities in meaningful ways. She lived to be 98, dying peacefully in 2001, the last direct link to those early days in Superior when her mother had fought so hard to practice medicine. Benjamin Fuller ran the family mining operation until copper prices collapsed in the 1950s, at which point he successfully transitioned the family holdings into other ventures. He married a teacher named Helen and raised 5 children who grew up hearing stories about their extraordinary grandparents. He lived to be 86, passing away in 1971 with his family around him. The story of Willow and Bennett became more than just a love story. It became a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, even when it is difficult. It became a reminder that prejudice and fear can be overcome by courage and love. It became proof that 2 people who believe in each other can change the world around them. Generations later, medical students in Arizona still learned about Willow Fuller, one of the first successful female physicians in the territory. Historians wrote about her contributions to frontier medicine. Her articles, preserved in medical journals, continued to be referenced by scholars studying the development of healthcare in the American West. But more than her medical achievements, what people remembered was the love story. The cowboy and the doctor, the man who saw past prejudice to recognize brilliance, the woman who refused to apologize for being extraordinary, the partnership they built based on mutual respect and unwavering support. In Superior, a small museum dedicated to local history included an entire room about Willow and Bennett. Visitors could see her medical instruments, his mining tools, photographs of their family, copies of her published articles, and letters they had written to each other during the rare times they were apart. The centerpiece of the exhibit was a large photograph of them on their 50th wedding anniversary, standing together with their hands clasped, looking at each other with expressions of complete devotion. Underneath the photograph, a plaque told their story. It described how Willow had been threatened for saving Samuel Hendricks, how Bennett had defended her, how they had fallen in love and built a life together. It ended with a quote from an interview Willow had given late in her life. "I was called evil for saving a child's life, but one good man called me a miracle worker. That made all the difference. Love and respect can overcome any obstacle. Bennett taught me that, and I never forgot it." Their story lived on in other ways too. Young couples in Superior had a tradition of visiting their graves on wedding days, asking for a blessing on their own marriages. Medical students beginning their careers came to pay respects to Willow, seeking inspiration from her example. People struggling against discrimination and prejudice drew strength from remembering how she had persevered. The house where they had lived together for over 50 years stood for many years after their deaths, carefully maintained by their descendants. Eventually, in the late 20th century, it was converted into a bed and breakfast, allowing visitors to sleep in the rooms where Willow and Bennett had dreamed and loved and built their life. Guests reported feeling a sense of peace in the house, as though the love that had filled it for so many years had soaked into the very walls. The examining room where Willow had seen her first patients after moving to Bennett's property was preserved exactly as it had been. Medical students and historians came from across the country to see where she had worked, to stand in the space where she had fought against ignorance and fear with nothing but her knowledge and determination. On the centennial of Willow's death in 2040, the town of Superior held a massive celebration. Descendants of both Willow and Bennett gathered, along with descendants of Samuel Hendricks and others whose lives had been touched by the couple. There were speeches and exhibits, a historical reenactment of the mob scene and Bennett's intervention, a medical symposium discussing Willow's contributions to frontier medicine. The oldest attendee was Samuel Hendricks's great-great-granddaughter, herself a physician, who was 102 years old. She spoke about growing up hearing stories of her ancestors' rescue and how it had inspired generation after generation of her family to pursue careers in medicine and service. Willow Fuller saved more than just Samuel's life that day, she told the gathered crowd. She saved everyone who came after. Every life Samuel saved as a doctor, every student he taught, every patient I have treated, all of it traces back to that moment when a brave woman refused to let a child die and a good man refused to let her be punished for it. Their love story is my origin story, and I am grateful every single day for their courage. The celebration ended with a candlelight vigil at their graves, hundreds of candles flickering in the desert night. People stood in silence honoring the memory of two remarkable individuals who had proven that love, courage, and decency could change the world. As the candles burned down and people slowly dispersed, one fact remained crystal clear. Willow and Bennett's story was not just history, it was a living legacy, continuing to inspire and encourage everyone who heard it. They had shown that standing up for what is right matters, that love can conquer fear, that two people committed to each other and to justice can make a real difference. The woman who had been called evil became a hero. The cowboy who had called her a miracle worker became her partner in creating miracles. Together they built a love story for the ages, one that would never be forgotten as long as people believed in the power of courage, conviction, and love that refuses to accept the world's limitations. Their graves stood side by side under the Arizona sky, two lives joined in death, as they had been in life. Testament to a love that had lasted more than half a century and inspired countless others. The inscription might have been simple, but the story it represented was anything but. It was a story of transformation and triumph, of fear overcome by love, of two souls finding each other against impossible odds and building something beautiful that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And somewhere, in whatever realm souls inhabit after death, Willow and Bennett were together still, hand in hand as they had always been, their love undiminished by the passage of time or the separation of death. Their story continued, written in the lives of everyone they had touched, preserved in memory and legend, an eternal reminder that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is two people who refuse to stop loving each other, no matter what obstacles stand in their way.